Thanks for popping in. This is our workshop on talking to users. Huge part is just, when you have a problem in mind, it's really important that you scope out the problem and really flesh out and understand, hey, what kind of users are we going to be working with here? Who do I want to build this product for? You have this great idea in mind. Now you just you need to guide your building. You need to make sure you're building for the right people. And this is how you're going to get those insights, just by directly talking to users. So again, checking code is here. It'll just be in the bottom left for the rest of this. Before I go any further, I want y'all to just think of a problem, big or small. We're going to do an activity, kind of brainstorming some questions, like doing our own sort of like mock user interview of sorts. So yeah, go ahead and just think of a problem as we go through the slides. You don't have to have one right now. Could even be like a more satirical problem. Anything is fine. Anyways, moving on. A quick overview of what we're going to be going through, just a goal of talking to users, starting points, some do's and don'ts, and then at the end we'll try it out with we'll try some of these techniques with our own toy problem. Moving on, and at any point, feel free to interrupt me. I have chat pulled up on a separate screen so I can see if you guys have any questions. All right. So first, why even bother talking to users, right? Why not just throw a bunch of features at the wall and just build something for each feature, right? So one, you want to make sure you're finding users with a problem. You want to make sure the people, who you're making this product, this great platform, this great idea for, you want to make sure this is going to solve an actual problem that they have. Your next part is to find that ideal first user base, because there's a lot of people who could probably use your idea, who could probably benefit from your idea, but you want to make sure the first group, the first people who are going to see your new idea, maybe it's not fully fleshed out, maybe it's a bit suspicious. You want to make sure these are the people who you want to pitch this to, the right people who have the most to gain from your product. And the last reason why you'd want to talk to users, and this is not exhaustive, you want to make sure you improve your product once you have your product built out. Once you've kind of have your first group of users, there's still use for talking to users. This helps you continually iterate your product for the right people. One of the techniques, and we won't go too much into this third point, but think aloud interviews, for example, are one example of going through build the idea of building new features and making sure your product is the right fit. Anyways, moving on. Let's talk about the starting point, which is, what's the heart of the problem. So, when you're talking to users, you'll want to have this mental checklist here of some parts of the problem that you'll want to have answers to. And I'll just quickly go through the bullet points. So the first one is, what is the hardest point of the problem? So just understanding, hey, I feel like this bullet point is very understandable, but because there's a lot of problems about a single problem itself, but you really want to get down to the core of what that problem is. Second point is, what's the context for this problem? When does this necessarily occur? So, it's pretty interesting to see how necessarily a user has gotten into this kind of problem. It'll help you figure out more what kind of user is going to end up stumbling upon this problem. And then the third point, what makes it so hard? Kind of speaks for itself there. And then the fourth point is, what are some existing solutions? What have they tried before? And it might just be that the person you're talking to doesn't even have a solution for this problem. They haven't tried anything. And it's going to be different with everyone, but for some people, this problem just might not be a big enough one that's worth solving. But if they do give you some solutions or some stuff they've tried before, you know, learn a bit more about those solutions. How have they used them? And this kind of goes into our last bullet point. What sucks about these existing solutions and what's good about them? What do they do well? Um, you want to keep all of these in mind when you're fleshing out your initial prototype. And we'll go through an example real quick. So this is one I just shamelessly ripped this one from a conversation I was just having with my friend the other day. So I'm sure you've all heard of the last mile problem. And this just came through natural conversation, which just goes to show, a lot of these user interviews, they don't have to be formal. These can just come from everyday conversation. These are not insights that you need structure for. Um, so I was just talking to my friend, and I was just asking him, hey, I mean, how did you even get back from the airport? Because this last mile problem is something that a lot of people face, and you know, um, the reason why, the first question, that I kind of get into this mental checklist of the hardest part of the problem is, what is the hardest part of getting from the airport to the student dorms? And you want to ask this because first you want to see if it's even a hard problem at all. You want to see if they've just experienced this last mile problem, and if this is a problem, you can start nailing into it. So in this scenario, my friend did actually end up having some trouble. His So the scenario kind of ended up being, okay, his friend who usually picks him up from the airport wasn't there this time to give him a ride. And already there, we're starting to build our checklist. We're finding out, hey, what has he tried before? He usually goes with his friends. His friends usually give him a ride. And that's an existing solution, right? And you're starting to find out, hey, with this existing solution, his his friends or his relatives aren't always there to pick him up. It's not consistent. Um, and as a result, he had to take an Uber. And going into that, I asked him, what's the most annoying part about Uber, and I mean, what do you like about it? And he just straight up told me, it's it's super expensive. There's there's not much to say. It's very expensive. There's no more carpooling option. He used to be a huge user of the carpooling option, um, and without that option, it is really frustrating for him to find a, a ride that is affordable. Sometimes one alternative he once tried was just taking the shuttle all the way from the airport to back to UCSD. But the trade-off there that he had to take was, it was almost like, I think, an hour and a half ride. Anyways, from this conversation, it's a bit of a casual conversation, but I've just, kept this mental checklist here of these 5 points, and had him, and, slowly kind of guided him towards answering some of these bullet points. Um, and again, as a quick note on the bottom, different users are always going to have different answers to these questions. So you'll want to, talk to, more than just one user. And make sure you talk to users from different backgrounds as well. And here are just some more structured questions. If if you are struggling to make conversation in the moment, you can always come up with some questions beforehand, and it doesn't hurt to come prepared. Moving on. So we'll talk a bit about, once you have your MVP, you still have a use to talk to users. Um, and it kind of boils down to some of these bullet points that I've placed here. And this is going to help you find your first user. So the first bullet point, is what's the impact, or how much does this problem affect or annoy this user? Is it worth solving for them? Um, so how much does this cost them? So for example, it could just be money. Like you could just put a number down and you say, okay, this this problem, this last mile problem, for example, this costed my friend $60. $60 Uber. How frequent? Um, so ideally, you'll want to scope out users who experience the the frequency of the problem is also going to determine how frequently you can test your MVP. So ideally, you'll want to have a user who suffers from this problem on a frequent basis, so you can continually get more and more feedback on your product. So, for example, in my friend's case, he how often does he go to the airport? Maybe not as often. He goes, once, every break per quarter, just to get back to the school dorms. Um, and the third bullet point, which is pretty important, do they have the ability to actually fix the problem? So in this case, my friend, does have a budget. Um, he maybe there is a more expensive option. Maybe for some people, maybe there's problems where spending more money might be an option. And that might be available to some people, for example, people in managerial positions for a certain product. Um, but in other cases, there are some people who just don't, even if this problem seeks to solve their problem, they can't do anything themselves about it. So those aren't going to be your first users. So make sure you consider all of these categories when you're talking to users. Something you can even do is run a spreadsheet. So I'll quickly go through an example here. So this is a dog walking. So one example is, maybe you've made a robot that can walk dogs. Okay. Um, but it does cost a decent amount of money. You've made your prototype and now you're trying to find that first user. Um, so let's give three example users. Like the first one is a person in their 20s, salary man at some company. They work, they don't get back home until like 6 p.m. and they're just exhausted until 7. And they have 5 dogs. Single, maybe it's a crazy dog person, and whatnot. And they really do wish to walk dogs a lot. So, but a problem with this is they don't actually have too much cash on hand. So this might not be your ideal user. But real quick, I'll go through all the options. And another person might be, a person in their 40s. They work as a teacher at a local high school, and they have a kid, and they have a dog. Um, but their kid, walks the dogs, so they don't really have a use for the dog walking robot. But they do have a decent amount of cash, so that is something to keep in mind as a first user who could potentially afford your product. And now one more user I'll go through, is a bit of a more elderly person, retired, and one of their biggest concerns is they don't want to go out and walk the dog as much just due to that fear of COVID. Maybe let's just say that. And they have 2 dogs. So they're home all day. So, they could walk the dog, but they're not able to. And occasionally, time to time, their their kid comes over to walk the dogs. But, you know, it's not something it's something that they would love to see their dogs be walked more often. And they have a decent amount of cash, just being in retirement. So maybe this third group might be the ideal group to target for your first users. Um, and this is something from there you can just reach out personally and ask them, hey, you want to use my first like product, and it becomes a matter of pitching from that point. But throughout all of these, one important thing is that you want to have this checklist, again, mental checklist of, hey, how much does this problem actually impact this person? How frequently do they go through this problem? And do they have the ability to fix this problem? Okay. So some quick do's and don'ts, and then we'll go into the example. Um, so one big do is make sure you're focusing on the user, and not as much on your solution or your idea. A huge part of these user interviews is, I mean, we we can you could probably pitch for days and days, and you're really enthusiastic about your idea. Um, but at the end of the day, you want to learn about the user and their problem, and you want to be able to see where your solution fits in, maybe later down the line, or you want to change your idea perhaps so that it fits a specific user's problem more. So in order to do that, learn more about their life first. Um, Next point, be try to be specific. Try to talk about anecdotes. Try to talk about things that have tangibly happened. Um, and I've fell into this trap a lot myself, where I'll be running user interviews for something, and I'll ask, hey, is this a feature you want to see, or is this a problem that you think you'd have? And they'll be like, yeah, sure, I could envision this happening, but has it actually happened? No, no, it has not happened yet. And if you're building your solution to fix hypothetical problems, you're not even guaranteed that you're solving a problem that exists. So do focus on these past events that have happened. Do focus on these anecdotal problems. Um, and then one last point, is, so listen a lot, talk less. This is also a personal bullet point that I fell into the trap of. Um, Feel free to guide their talking whenever you feel like they're getting off track, or some of the stuff they're saying maybe isn't helping you as much. But make sure you're taking notes on everything, because you don't know at what point maybe some obscure note or some obscure fact that they brought up in their user interview might help you later. And your product is constantly changing, so really have a recording, or bring a second note taker with you, if that helps you take notes better and still focus on the conversation. But make sure to listen and get those key features out. Okay. Um, okay. Yeah. So where do you start? Who do you start with? Who do you ask to run these user interviews, right? So now you have this bit of a mental checklist, and we'll get a bit into making questions per se, or focusing, on what to say in a bit in a quick second. But um, an easy group that you can start with is yourself. Oftentimes, a lot of the products that we make, they come from problems that we've thought of ourselves. And oftentimes, because we've thought of them ourselves, maybe it's problems that we've also faced ourselves. So, it helps to run some of your initial questions, some of your initial guidance, go through this mental checklist that I showed earlier, on yourself. So, that gives you a starting base of questions. Although, do keep in mind, you do have a bias. You want to make sure you're aware. You can feel free to try to stop your bias. But end of the day, just be aware that there's some assumptions that you may make in your questions that other users might have a completely different worldview to. Um, the second group is just friends, families, coworkers, people you're close to. um, just feel free to ask and reach out. I'm sure they're all pretty friendly. They'll be willing to lend a hand. And maybe if your product is a little less focused on something that your friends, family, or coworkers can use, you'll want to directly talk to people in that field. So, maybe for example, let's go back to the last mile problem. You're, you know, you want to ask people how they've personally dealt with the last mile problem. So you end up going to the airport, like just, drive to the airport, get to the airport somehow, and just interview people who are there, ask them about their past experiences at the airport. Just observe people in the act of your problem. Observe people who are struggling from your problem. This is where you're going to get the most information about how people are currently solving your problem. Um, Moving on. This is the last slide. I have a few more slides actually. That's a bit of a lie, but let's try this with your own idea. So I guess I hope y'all have thought of a problem right now, and I just want you to go ahead and mentally check off these 5 bullet points. So yeah, I'll go ahead and ask each of you guys individually if you guys want to go for that. Can it run Doom? Okay, yeah. Um, Maybe you want to go through. So the problem is you're a really avid Doom player, right? And let's see. Maybe let's say you're an avid Doom player. Um, but the hardest part is maybe you don't have access to really good you don't have access to really good hardware. Um, you know, but you are a very avid Doom player, so you want to play a lot, but you're on the budget. Um, you've maybe in the past you've tried to get it working on whatever electronic gadgets you have. Yeah, okay. So crypto miners taking away all the GPUs. So maybe you have enough to afford a CPU, maybe, or maybe you don't. In which case, maybe you're trying to get it working on your existing hardware. So like maybe let's say you have a calculator laying around and you want to get Doom running on your TI-89 or something. Um, this could be an existing solution that you've tried. Yeah. Um, I guess Momo, Anthony, Shirley. Does anyone else wanna share any of their problems? Okay. Yeah, sure. So deciding where to eat, that's definitely a big problem. Um, I guess real quick to kind of narrow it down, Anthony, are you thinking? Let's get some more context on this. Um, Maybe let's see. Is there a specific? Maybe there's a time you want to talk about where maybe you were with your friends or were you by yourself when you encountered this problem of deciding where to eat. Gotcha. Um, and from there, maybe you can ask your friends why they didn't focus on their ideas. But I guess ask yourself, you know, did you want to propose an idea? And when proposing that idea, why did you not settle with that idea? Um, did it come to some sort of loop? And I don't want to fill in too many of the details because I don't want to add my own bias here. So maybe this is for example, if we were doing a user interview right now, I just committed a cardinal sin of talking too much. But yeah, maybe if you could describe more about a specific scenario. Feel free to go into the details. Maybe you even want to talk about the restaurants you picked. And real quick, while you're thinking of something about for that answer, Anthony, I'm gonna just move ahead with the next slide so I can finish up this recording. So the biggest takeaway here is just talk. Just don't be scared. I know it's really, you can get really nervous talking to people, but end of the day, you're talking to people. These are the people who are going to use your product. These are the people, who want to, there are people out there who want to use your idea, who can benefit from your idea. And the only way you're going to find them is by talking to them and learning more about them. So just find them and talk to them. You'll get better with more user interviews. Maybe you make a few slip ups here and there, but you get better with time. So just go ahead, go out there and just, go do some user interviews. Um, yeah, quick link bank. I'll post the slides in the Discord